Wonderful. Well, Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to the January 7th Housing Opportunity Fund Advisory Board meeting. We are so pleased to have this many members with us this afternoon. And we are going to start the meeting officially with roll call. Lena Andrews.
Here.
Tanika Harris.
Present.
Karen Garrett.
Here.
Ellie Fisher. Councilperson Deb Gross. Deidre Washington. I thought I saw Deidre.
Present. I'm here.
Wonderful. Alan Cisco.
Hi, guys. I'm here.
James Reed.
Hey, I'm here. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Adrian Wanaha, Chair, present. Kiana, before we move forward, do we have any news from the mayor's office on our membership?
Great question. We staff at the URA have been meeting with the mayor's office monthly, working on vacant seats. We do expect to hopefully start to fill those seats. Now that council's back in session, there's a process that folks who they select will have to go through with council before they can actually fill the seat. And so we do expect some activity to occur in Q1 2025. And so I do hope to have the majority of the vacant seats filled hopefully within the first quarter of the year. But we'll be happy to give you another update next month as we continue this process.
Well, we appreciate it. This is a great turnout of membership. We appreciate all of you. We may be small, but we are mighty. We're going to move to the review and acceptance of the minutes from the December 11th meeting.
Adrian, I want to just make sure that you know I'm here.
Wonderful.
Jerome Jackson.
Thank you, Jerome. Do we have anyone else that popped in while we were doing roll call? Well, now our attendance is even more impressive. Hearing no other members present, we will move to the review and acceptance of the minutes from December 11th. Do we have any questions, concerns, or additions? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve the minutes from December.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Thanks, Karen. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any abstentions?
I abstain. I wasn't there.
Thanks, Lena. Motion carries to accept the minutes from December 11th. I do not believe we have public comment for today.
No, I do not believe so.
We did hear from Megan. She has been trapped in Maryland. The weather hit them a lot harder than it hit us. So she is intending to be back locally in a few weeks. So I think Megan had a lot on her plate today as our more regular public commenter. If we have others that join us later in the meeting, we'll make time at the end of the meeting for any public comment that may be available. All right, can we move to the URA administrative updates?
Thanks, Adrian. It's Kiana Wassler, Chief Housing Officer at the URA. I'll be providing a HAP update. So the Homeowner Assistance Program, or HAP program, is undergoing some additional changes. In December, the HAP guideline revisions were discussed at the HOF board, as well as introduced at the URA board in December. That's currently still in a 30-day public comment period, so the public can comment on the changes that were made to the program guidelines. The goal is for the URA board to take a final vote on the HAP guidelines at our February 13th board meeting. And we would like to open the HAP round, which is a pilot round with Action Housing, as a nice Valentine's Day present to the city of Pittsburgh residents on February 14th. We've been working really hard with Action Housing and coordinating this opening and making sure we're all on the same page and we have everything ready. And so that's the goal. I think what we talked about in December is that when this board, I think, discussed HAP in November as well, and the guideline changes that you recommended are not exactly what's in the guidelines currently, the revision currently. And so we may want to talk again today about whether you all want this to be just an outright grant or a forgivable loan or some other structure. Well, the way it's written right now in the guidelines is that it's a grant that has a 10-year deed restriction as well, I believe. But when we discussed it at this committee at length previously, the goal was to have a grant that had like a 10-year forgivability period, which doesn't really make sense for a grant. So I don't know, Adrian, if you want to open up that discussion or if we want to just kind of keep it the way it is. I don't know.
I would like to open up that discussion. I also would like to announce that Ellie Fisher is having some trouble getting into the meeting. She said it appears to be frozen for her. I'm not seeing her being able to be in the meeting yet.
I just let her in.
Oh, wonderful. There we
She's on her
go.
way.
I wanted to make sure that Ellie was with us for this conversation. So as Kiana noted, we had some discussion related to the HAP program and the guidelines. There has been discussion in the past and over time related to forgivable loan versus grant. I think that we have all wanted to make the program as responsive to folks who need it as possible. Also trying to balance that with how we keep affordability and how we are able to regenerate funds into the Housing Opportunity Fund bank. So at this time, we will open up for thoughts related to forgivable grant, forgivable loan.
Grant or forgivable loan. Yeah, I know it's confusing, but the technicalities of it is what we feel about a grant is that it's a one-time award that's not to be paid back. And
That would also be my understanding. And I think the way that we talked about it primarily in this group in the past.
okay. And then when we came to a vote as to how we wanted to when the Hoff board came to a vote as to how we wanted to restructure the guidelines, we called it a grant with the ability to be repaid if the home is sold within 10 years. And
Which
so
is a little bit of
it's not really a grant.
right.
We could call it a forgivable loan where a tenth of it is forgiven a year, but I think we just need to, it's technicalities, unfortunately, but I do think we need to determine like what's the correct language we want to use here and the correct way we want to administer this program. I will say now that we're in this pilot mode, it's easier to administer a grant versus a loan because we would have a partner agency entering into mortgages and different things on behalf of the URA, or it'll be another layer of, step for us to do. But I don't want that. I'm just saying that it's just administrative, so you'll understand what we'd have to do. Don't want that to cloud, the decision making around it.
And I think to Kiana's point, not just the original administration of these funds, but with a 10-year restriction that actually holds the URA and whatever body that's administering the funds to task in a 10-year time period, which we have discussed in this board being an administrative burden, that it's difficult to quantify what the value of that is.
Mhm.
And I know that that's been a concern for members of, there's sort of two prongs of the individual who's receiving the funds and how their situations may change and what is best for them and their housing longevity. But then also, again, this administrative component, not only for the people who are applying, but also the organizations that are running the programs. Does it really, the money that would come back to the URA, to the fund, does that balance out with that administrative burden? And does it really get us where we're hoping to be? So I know those are pieces that we've definitely discussed in the past. Thoughts from the advisory?
Yeah, I have a question. So, I guess if if we call it a forgivable loan, then the URA staff still has some work that they still need to continue to do on it, which will still be a kind of a cost burden on the URA, correct?
Not, yes, we would have additional work. I would call it more of an administrative burden versus a
Okay.
cost burden.
Okay, administrative, okay, but
yeah.
not as much as if we were to call it a grant with this 10-year. If you don't, if you sell your home within 10 years, you pay us back. You're saying that would create an administrative burden, correct? I just want to be clear I'm understanding.
So throughout the process of the homeowner assistance program, there's application, there's kind of underwriting by the staff, whether it's URA or our partners doing the underwriting for us. And then we're going to enter into agreement with the homeowner, and then the contractor can start the work. So either way, that layer of entering into agreement, whether it's a grant or a loan, is there's a layer of that administrative process in the process. It's just, if it's a grant, it's not a mortgage that shows up on the homeowner's property. We will, however, have a deed of restrictive covenants. Now, if it's a loan, it will be a mortgage that shows up on their property. If they want to refinance in the future, they have to come through us to get our approval while we have that mortgage there. If the property, so with the grant, the differences, those are the two main differences of the grant and the loan. If it's a grant, it's not a mortgage, it doesn't show up. Homeowner has capacity to maybe fundraise using equity in the home in the future, without having to come through us and request subordination from us. And so while that mortgage is there, we have certain rights, but for the loan. For the deed restriction on the grant, while that deed restriction sits there, that property has to be an affordable property. So if, someone received this grant and in year 5, they have the deed restriction, in year 5, if they want to sell the property, they would be required to sell it to an 80% or below buyer to keep it at an affordable AMI level of home ownership. So those are the two main differences. It's a big difference, but I think when Action Housing presented, who's our partner for the pilot, presented around going the route of the grant versus the mortgage, they thought the grant was more equitable. It doesn't kind of tie up the homeowner's equity in the home and allows them to, more freedoms in the future if need be. And I potentially agree with that.
Potentially.
I mean, I do. I do agree with that. Sorry, I do.
Yeah, no, me too. Me too. I like one of those things puts an enormous burden on the URA and Action, and the other one lets the very occasional case that one of these houses is going to get recycled, lets that sort of trigger on demand as opposed to you having to monitor it constantly. So yeah, I think, and all of this is a 30, what is it, 30 or 35 grand per unit? Something like
35,000 per home.
And so like that's an investment in what is very likely in most cases going to continue to be a like housing stock that people with lower incomes are going to want to live in. So like yeah, to me a grant makes a ton of sense.
So
Other thoughts?
can I ask Alan a question? Alan, I think you suggested the step down of a repayment is what I'm saying making like I just want to make sure I don't negate what you were trying to
No, when we had that conversation months ago, it feels like I think that the context was we were talking about there being like there needing to be like some sort of repayment, but if it is on the table that these are sort of, or at least that was my understanding at the time. If it is on the table that these are very sort of straightforward grant agreements that just have a simple deed restriction that the seller and buyer have to sort of trigger at what is going to be again a rare transaction with these kinds of properties, this kind of housing stock, like I'm super comfortable with that. That's what we did at Rebuilding Together when I worked there for like over a decade. And very few of those homes recycle like in a sort of like gentrifying kind of fashion. Most of them end up sticking with the family when the original homeowner moves on.
Mhm.
So yeah, sorry if I added to the confusion in some way. But
It's you, Alan.
yeah, no, I didn't know. I maybe I misinterpreted something in our previous conversation. If that's the case, I'm sorry. But no, yeah, grants are fine with me. I just want that makes a ton of sense.
Okay.
Other comments, questions, or anyone that would like to make a motion related to the grant versus loan inquiry that we're currently in the middle of?
Well, I just was going to agree with Alan and say that I would prefer it to be a grant as well. That's what I was kind of getting at. If the amount of attention that staff has to pay on the project is versus a loan and a grant is if someone sells it as a grant, it activates the staff to have to do something as opposed to the staff to have to continually kind of watch on something. So I think that I would rather it be a grant as well. So with the deed restriction.
Quick question, I guess, a little bit in the weeds on the deed restrictions. So how would staff be notified of that? How does that process kind of work out from an administrative perspective? I'm just trying to kind of understand a little bit more of what I guess the ongoing burden is in terms of monitoring, the status. Is that something that is triggered and then there's a notification that has to come into the URA before, a sale can proceed?
Correct. We don't typically monitor them annually. What happens is there's a sale of a property, this deed pops up on the title, and then we are notified as to the transaction. And at that time, if we're still within that 10 years, we will kind of ensure that the deed restriction is enforced.
Is that a notification from the county or?
It's typically from the property owner.
Okay.
Title company or real estate agent, someone like that who is attempting, in the middle of a attempt to sell the property.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's helpful.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Ellie, I think you also had a question.
Thank you. Actually, it was that 10 years. So it was preemptively done. So let's just play it out a little bit. If somebody, we know it's going to be a rare case, family decides to sell, they're selling at somewhere before year 10. They can either sell it at an affordable, we're not really fixing their price. We're just saying who they can sell it to, right? That the buyer needs to income qualify under 80%. Is that what we're saying?
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
And-
And
and we-
hopefully we have some supports for that. Hopefully the price is affordable at that level anyway. Yeah.
Hopefully at that point we do. And we can also provide the area median income, the federal guidelines of the area median income for that year so that they'll understand what that amount is. Mhm.
I'm in support of this. Okay.
Any additional questions for Kiana? Well, it looks like there is a sort of tacit agreement amongst the group related to this being a grant. Do we have someone that feels comfortable making a motion related to that at this time?
Since I apparently caused all this problem.
There you go, Alan. Step up.
I will make the motion that the the changes to the HAP program make the full amount a grant with a 10-year deed restriction.
Do we have a second on that motion?
A second.
Thank you, Tanika. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone abstaining, Lena?
Sorry, yes. I'm abstaining. Yet again.
Are there others that need to abstain from the vote? Is there anybody that is not in favor of the vote? Hearing none, I will say that that carries. Thank you, Kiana, for bringing that back to the table.
Thank you.
Are there other other URA administrative updates outside of the HAP program?
Not at this time.
Well, we're going to move into, I think, what's going to be the meatiest section of today's conversation, which is the demonstration dollars. We started this conversation last month. The team has been actively working on options for how we can take a look at these dollars, the application process, the rollout, how we evaluate these requests for these dollars. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So yeah, this is definitely going to be the big ticket item today, talking about the demonstration dollars, following up on our conversation from last month. So I can just take us over to the form if we'd like to take a look at it again. You'll notice I've made a few edits specifically around accessibility. I found the job form accessibility options, which certify it as accessible, made sure that everything that needs a description has one. I believe that JotForm has a text-to-speech function as well. I selected a color scheme that is supposed to be easily readable for those that have, certain eyesight, disabilities. And then I was also able to change some of the wording specifically on the AMI levels. I know that was one that we had, the board had requested to be a little different. And I was also able to make a sort of scoring system where potential programs will be scored out of 30 possible points and will be calculated at the bottom. Now, some of that I am planning to be able to do automatically, but some of it will have to be done manually for some of the more open-ended questions. But I also have a rubric to go along so that, these things will be consistent. Now, some of this can change. I know it's a little rough right here. We're going to write it up into a guidelines, but this is sort of the general idea that, we want to be able to prioritize how many of the units, if it's a development, are being made affordable, how long the affordability is. We're going to award points based on AMI levels. We're thinking there's a way to make this less subjective. Right now, all the highlighted ones are ones that, I was going to do manually. but again, there is that criteria alongside it. So yeah, I'd love to open this up for questions or comments. If any board members have good ideas about this. This is just sort of a rough idea to basically score them out of 30. And my idea right now, and I'd also love to hear this, is to sort of have a write-up paragraph based on every like about each application that we'll provide with the number to you, the advisory board, to be able to review. But if you, the advisory board, would like to see the applications in full to make your decisions, or if you'd like less information, just the number, however you all want this formatted, whatever is most helpful to you, that's what I want to provide to you. So I'm gonna open it up.
So Eric,
Yeah.
on the actual form,
Sure.
underneath accessibility, whatever color that is, I cannot. It washes out with the white. So is that like a yellow or something?
No,
It's actually their logo.
it's actually a gray, and it's their logo. I don't think I get to choose that one.
Oh, well, okay, never mind. Then. Okay, that's their logo. Okay, I can't see.
That's
So
just
I'm somebody with low vision issues, so that washes those light colors. A light color on
the
a
irony.
light background washes
Yeah,
out.
that is an interesting point, that their accessibility certification emblem is not accessible in itself. I'm gonna look into that, see if I can change that color somehow. But fortunately, that has no repercussions
Yes,
to the
no, no.
actual
Yeah.
form itself. That's just the little stamp that it puts on it. So that doesn't actually change how it fills out. But that is a good thing to note. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, I will definitely see if I can change the color of that.
So I'm just gonna roll back for a quick second. So this is really a parallel to the start of the advisory, really thinking about funds rollout. And from the very beginning with each fund, and I'm going to use rental gap as the example because I think it's probably the easiest one to use as the example. From the beginning, thinking about the dollars. So in this conversation, we have demonstration dollars. We have a prior year's demonstration dollars. We have a current year's demonstration dollars, and we have a future year's demonstration dollars, sort of all in this discussion. And there are a few key sort of prongs to the discussion, which is I'm going to try to just capture in just a few buckets. So sort of question one, what types of projects do we want to prioritize? Do we want to prioritize? What types of projects are going to come in? That could be a variety of different types of projects. So we want to set up some type of scoring that includes both less subjective and more subjective pieces of an application. So things like units, what demographic of folks are going to be served, what geography, what income level. So folks that are going to be served by these projects. What types of application process are we going to use? Is it going to be rolling? Is it going to be static? So are we doing this? Are we trying to make sure that we have dollars on this street every quarter of a given year? Are we trying to get dollars on this street in whatever fashion we get applications in? What type of application do we as board members commit to looking at? And I think rental gap is a great example for this. Of when we started, we saw every application in its entirety. Every piece of information that was submitted by a project, the board had access to and reviewed. What we found from that is some folks really loved that and dove in ahead of our meetings to really look at those applications carefully. And we also had folks that did not do that. So the URA was put in the position to have to summarize each one of those applications in the board meeting because folks hadn't really looked at the applications carefully. And that's how we got into the format that we have now, where the URA has been distilling those applications for us. And I am not saying one of those is right or wrong, but it does really depend on members of this group and the commitment that we make to doing those reviews. So there are options from we get the entire packets, we review those in full prior to meetings. Then the URA could provide highlights to us about those applications. Or we could stick with a more summarized version where the URA provides us a summary report, and then we ask questions related to that. But again, it's for us as a board to be careful thinking about what we want to fund and why, and what commitment we're making to these applications. If they are rolling and we have applications coming in every month, we need to have quorums in order to make decisions on those applications. If those application rounds were, say, quarterly or twice a year, that changes the look of meetings, what we're discussing in a meeting when we have time devoted to applications. So we really want to, take the full step back and look at this as the opportunity to take what we've learned and pull it forward to make things a little bit more robust where we feel that maybe we haven't done our best work, or to simplify the process in places where maybe we feel we've been a little bit too onerous in our expectations. So this is a lot of white space that Eric just put up here. So opening it up to conversation on the application itself, scoring and its review, how we rank projects, what our priorities are, how we get this out on the street, and how we actually vote and approve these projects.
Some ideas, I'll just throw them out there to start. We can
Thanks,
jump.
Ellie.
I think that we should only look at this maybe twice a year or even once, and we should prioritize giving out, one, maybe two of grants in these dollars. So bigger amounts, give out the whole 300,000 or give out 150 or something. But I don't really want to see us doing small $10,000 here and there for this demonstrate. This is, hey, do a pilot project that is really creative and longer term. We know the money will go out the door. The other, I think the income level is pretty easy because we have the structure already for that. And then I think we need to be specific that this is only for dollars that in the RFP process, it's only for dollars that aren't otherwise qualified for any of our other grants. I think that if we decide to apply the dollars to some other program that we have, that could be our decision internally. But I wouldn't want anybody to apply through the application system when, okay, really you could just be funded through rental gap or whatever. Mm-hmm. So those are my initial thoughts. I look forward to bantering this about with people.
Ellie, I think you're spot on with your instincts there. I also don't sort of want, speaking to the conversation about what we commit to and what we're able to do as individual members. I don't want us in the position of trying to navigate every month, oh, but maybe something cool is coming next month, so let's be conservative. I don't want, that's not a good use of this group, I don't think. So yeah, whether it's once a year, twice a year, somewhere in there feels right to me as well. And then I think to the question around how much information, I think that I think that is, if we're gonna sort of try to leverage this as fewer larger gifts, fewer larger grants, fewer larger distributions, whatever we end up calling these things. I think probably that puts the URA in the position of probably having to give us a little bit of a brief on them. But I like that. I like using the demonstration dollars for that kind of purpose. So basically, Ellie's right in my opinion.
So I would add to that. So one of the things I was thinking about was I like themes. So if we think about like a yearly theme, so if we had this set as a yearly theme, I'm just going to throw this out there because Alan said, so if we do like this is the year we do housing development. So demonstration dollars will be centered around housing development projects. And that happens twice a year. So I am in agreement with the twice a year piece and more substantial. I think that's more impactful. Not negating the seed grant, seed funding. A lot of our organizations were built around seed funding. So not taking that away from anything. But for this, we have a unique opportunity when there's already available funds. And but I also want to be mindful. I don't think it's a great idea to completely deplete the funds because there are instances where when an emergency comes, and I think that this having these flexible dollars is still crucial. Around a yearly theme, I think that yearly theme will help us to prioritize, and then we think about impact. When creating like a new funding source, right? So, but that flexibility is so crucial. So I hope I'm not like shooting myself in the foot at the same time, so I just don't want to deplete all of the demonstration dollars on one or two projects, but they should be substantial. I do believe that they should be a substantial amount. And then think about the marketing around that as well. And then making sure we tell the story, because that could be huge. Telling the story about that. And then also, I'm not sure, and this is a URA question, is it possible to utilize the demonstration dollars to leverage other funding from, thinking about, because I think that's something as an advisory board, we should be even thinking about diversifying our funding stream. So, what does that look like? If that's an area where that's not designated, if we can utilize that as a way, like, hey, look, this is what we did with this. How can we get more funding?
And I think, Eric,
Yeah,
so two
sorry,
things.
just 1 second. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties. The camera cut out. I just want to unplug and replug real quick.
Okay. So hopefully folks can still hear us. I think one of the
Yeah, we
things
hear
that
you.
we've had continually in applications is the leveraging of other dollars. And I think we should always there's sort of two prongs of demonstration dollars in the way that they've been used in the past is more for, innovation, and then also for sort of gaps and emergencies. And I think that there is a tension between how we use that. And I do think all of the members have felt that tension over time because we know that there's value in preservation and there's value in innovation. And I think we want to remember that during our conversation. Lena Andrews, I'm going to call you out for a moment.
Yes.
As a person who's been through the demo dollar conversation several times, what is your thinking?
I think we just want to make the process as flexible as possible. I guess the times that we've been able to use the demo dollars at action, it was like a really urgent need that came up. So I wouldn't want to create a process that made it impossible for things that arise that like we are unable to predict. So, I like a lot of these ideas that I'm hearing, but I don't want to have too many like restrictions on them if there's some urgent housing need that can be met by the demo dollars. Because it is like in the grand scheme of housing, it is kind of a smaller and nimble funding source, unlike our other programs. So I just want to keep it as nimble as possible.
Thank you, Lena. Other thoughts from members who haven't raised their thinking yet? Well, as a member who hasn't raised my thinking yet, here's my thinking in a nutshell. I think that since we have sort of 3 years in play, for me, what I would love to see us do is I really like the larger projects, not, 50 tiny projects, but, really focusing on some larger projects. But I like that in two prongs. I would personally like us to see using those funds in a split of rolling out to impact projects and having funds for emergent, urgent projects and tweaking the two applications. So there's two buckets. One of them really speaks to, speaking to the emergent or urgent need. The other speaks to the innovation need. That's sort of where my head's been over the last 6 months. And since we have a moment in time to potentially do both with more structure and with more transparency, I think it would be a nice opportunity to do both. Karen, Deidre, what are you thinking about what's been said? Jerome, I can't see everybody. I'm sorry.
I have no comments on it. I mean, what I've heard is good so far.
James,
The-
Karen.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought the conversation initially about the application and the form review, but it seems like it would limit that distribution on these demo dollars. Um, I don't know. I think I like the flexibility better in terms of meeting, kind of two tracks of needs. And I thought we had some preliminary discussion at our last meeting about, maybe some innovative projects that we may be able to support, as well as the emergent needs. So I guess that's where my head is in terms of looking at some opportunities that may not have been addressed or, maybe new. And I guess that's where I come from in terms of the innovation, and where I initially thought that when we was doing committees, that's where I kind of stood at looking at new things that we probably have not thought of. And I don't know, just wanting to be on the cutting edge or best practices of being able to support some smaller projects. Now, what that looks like in terms of managing it from,
Yeah.
the URA's perspective, I don't want anything to be cumbersome either, for anybody to engage in, and maybe having a couple of quarterly times where we address the demonstration dollars, I would be in support of. Those are my
Thank you,
thoughts.
Karen.
Yeah, so I mean, I there's a lot to like from where this discussion is going. I mean, what I guess I'm hearing a bit of a consensus on is, having sort of a standard application process where, we're at most twice a year doing a call for applications, having those reviewed and scored under a set of criteria, and able to prioritize using the bulk of funds on the highest scoring applications in those processes, but then also having something around noting that there could be a moment where, for example, there is an emergency at shelter or somewhere else in the housing system that, the demonstration dollars could play an incredibly useful part in helping to plug that budget and working with other, potential emergency funders to resolve that. So, I mean, I think all of that sounds good to me, but I'm just a little, I guess I'm a little more reserved in this conversation because it's a little challenging to think about this still at a higher sort of, because we're still talking somewhat abstractly about this, and not really having in front of me a good sense of what exactly a project might look like that's coming through makes it a little challenging. But
Yeah.
all of that to say, I don't want that hesitation to kind of stop moving forward, because there's, like I said, I think there's a lot of good in what I've heard about how the approach is. And I think the only thing that I would be concerned about on, the application is just making sure that even when we do have an application that's ready, to be released as a call for applications, that we have something that is still relatively easy to complete and submit and isn't going to necessarily require a ton of, documentation in order for us through it. Because I think paperwork burden is something that we're all familiar with, and it's something that is really challenging when you're trying to be nimble, when you're trying to be quick, and when you're trying to uplift vulnerable populations.
So, James, I want to just thank you for saying that. One of the things I thought about as you were talking, when you were talking about an example and thinking about what Lena said and thinking about what Adrian said about having the flexibility, many of us saw the horrific fire that happened in East Hills over the holiday. And that is something, and immediately what I thought about, and it came to me from a personal side because my son-in-law is a firefighter and he was there. And that was the first time he experienced something to that magnitude. And it hit home, and I'm watching on social media and everybody's putting things together to help these families. And I said, we need to have some where can we go? There has to be something out there. There has to be something, and there has to be a mechanism in place to be able to help and support this type of instance, right? And so, James, as you're talking about, making sure that we have a system in place, but also not over system something, because we can do that. But understanding that there are checks and balances, it's government funding no matter what. And so there are some things that we just can't get out of. But for this in particular, to Lena's point earlier, having something that's flexible. So even this incredible application process that the URA team has put together, thinking about on Adrian's side, we have this two-prong. So there's one that's already that's similar to that. But then for emergencies, there are some very basic things that we can get out of it. Because can you imagine individuals in an emergency situation having to fill that whole thing out? That would be, I would be ashamed.
Yeah,
I would be ashamed. And so thinking about wanting to put a face to it, that we know that there's funding sitting in an account that could potentially help the families in East Hills who were living in subpar conditions anyway, and having to live off of a space heater, right? And so what it costs, like, this is a way that we could be truly impactful, and it's helping generations. So I wanted to just share that to I'm not trying to trauma bond with anyone, but that is something that's real. It's happening in our city, and that was just something that made the news. And there's so many other situations and stories like that that have not made the news. But that is a way that we should be thinking about that. We should be seeing people's faces as we're making these decisions and having these conversations and thinking about the process. And there has to be a way for us to be able to make this work. And sometimes sometimes the process is not going to check every box, but we have to be okay and not be scared to do it because it's the right thing to do regardless.
So we're about an hour into the meeting, so I'm going to set up a straw man. Because it seems like we get much better conversations when we have something to respond to instead of just unlimited white space, which this slide is perfect because it's just a big old white slide. So what if we have 3 years of funding to talk about? What if we split the funding in half and we said one bucket would be for innovation and pilots, and one bucket would be for emergent need and emergencies? We had the bucket related to innovation with 2 application cycles per year, and we had the emergent urgent bucket set with a rolling application process. We took the application that Eric has put together and we say that is a robust application. We'd like to use that for the innovative pilot projects. And we're going to trim that down to the core items that we would need in an emergent situation. We would put those 2 applications out, one as rolling for urgent and emergent. We would have one as a set time during the year, and we would have those applications attached. We would do our outreach accordingly. Let's discuss.
So I think that's a good idea. I like that. I would make the split more 70-30. I think the emergencies don't, I mean, they do happen, but I don't know if they'll happen that to the amount of needing 50% of the dollars that we have. So I would like to probably think more around that, but I would think maybe more of a 70-30 split of that. But having emergency dollars definitely is a wonderful idea. Wonderful idea. So that's what I would think.
I'm looking at my URA colleagues to just make sure that I didn't say anything that makes no sense whatsoever. Other thoughts?
I'm visual. I had to draw what you said. So yeah. Made a diagram of
the emergency and innovation, and I'm trying to think beyond just this year. I thought we just had 2 years of money, but what if like the current?
So we do have something left. So we're sort of in that weird, like we have 2023 and earlier, we have 2024, we have 2025, if I'm remembering correctly.
Let me confirm the 2023.
Because 2025, obviously, we don't have in our hand yet. I'm not suggesting that we do, but again, that's a straw man of, I think there's funds from 3 years that we could potentially be discussing. Definitely 2024, definitely 2025, but I think there's some older dollars that are still out there.
Yeah, there should be.
Cool. I don't know exactly which order to do this, and I bet somebody has the right idea, but what if, and I'll just say it one direction that could be flopped, and it doesn't matter in my mind right now. What if you had, you know, the dollars for this year are emergency funds, and they're available all year as emergency funds, and then the dollars from previous years are for innovation funds. So that at the end of this year, if we haven't spent those emergency funds, they just automatically become the innovation funds for next year.
Yeah, so I'm just going to say, I think that that's a little more in the weeds than we need to be at the moment, which year we're putting what dollars to, but absolutely, Ellie, I think it's really I think it's a Tetris. I'm trying to get my finger on the pulse of the group of, do we prioritize innovation and piloting of concepts? Do we prioritize urgent and emergent needs? Do we do both? And at what level would we want to do both?
I think we would do both. And I'm amenable to anything between, you know, a 50-50 split and a 70-30 split, although maybe I'd lean more towards 65-35, with 35 being for emergencies. It's sort of at my top end. I mean, but that's generally what my comfort level is. And I think, you know, having the dollars available for both is important.
Okay, so I think I'm hearing we would like to do both. In whatever monetary combo that we can do that. I think I also heard folks feeling like something like a rolling application meets the emergent needs better than just saying, oh, well, you can only apply for that in June.
Yeah, that defeats the purpose. Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, so I think I've also heard that we like innovation, but we really don't love tiny grants. that we would like to, if we're going to do grant making, we would like to do it at a higher level, especially with the innovation dollars, than trying to separate the pot into 20 different projects. I think I heard that.
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Before we get to a final kind of vote, just for your consideration, the funding that we have available is 2 years. It's 2024, there's $350,000 unspent, and then the 2025 allocation, which I believe was $300,000. There may have been a report that showed there was $175,000 left in 2023, but that was an error. That's been spent, and it was given to the HSP program at the end of the year of that year in 2023 to help continue those efforts.
Yeah, I
Thank
remember
you for
said
clear.
that. Yep.
No problem.
Okay, remember that.
Mhm.
Is there time
Lots
for
of
further
moving parts.
discussion on this, Adrian? Are we moving on?
Well, no, so if we have some base core things that we agree on, I think that helps us in looking at, what Eric has here on the slide. So I think the application form, oh, I'm sorry, Karen.
No, I'm sorry. Continue.
So I think the application form, I don't know about anybody else, but for me, it's hard to look at that on this screen. I think we need to review that again. And then I think we would want to make some recommendations on how would that form look different if what we were prioritizing was these emergent needs. So I would love to say, outside of a meeting, for all of us to take a look at that form again, how we feel about that form through a lens of innovation and piloting, and how we would think about trimming that form down for sort of these emergent requests.
And just to add a comment to that, right now there's what you're seeing is the full application, all the layers kind of opened up. There's 2 layers in it now. One is for an existing, a new use or an existing program. We can add a 3rd layer into that so that there'll be, if you click emergency, you'll have a separate set of questions beyond just the standard like name, address, all of that. A separate pop out of an application. We can
Yeah.
start to draft that.
We can absolutely do that. And right now, the application has it actually has 3 routes already. It's existing HOF programs, new construction, and then new services. How is the group feeling about the existing HOF being a part of that form, like the existing HOF programs?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so I know we've had some differences of opinion about folks that could use, like, say something like rental gap program. So I'm going to use rental gap because I think it's just easy. So someone may have applied for rental gap funds through the traditional means, may have been funded, may be moving along in the project. But that does not mean that there might not be an emergent need that comes in that same project. I'm going to say for innovative projects, when we're talking about innovation, we're not talking about our projects that we already have. But we could be in that emergent need talking about the same projects that we have. So I think that that's important for us to remember. There may be someone who is funded through rental gap at the appropriate level through the traditional process, but there may be something that emerges in that project or in a community or just in our world, like COVID, that could change the tempo. So we may want to give emergent dollars to an existing funded program because something has changed. Does that resonate with folks? I think I'm seeing head shaking.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yes. And I think we need to describe what will be considered an emergent need. Because we don't want to be all over the place with it. So I think that would be necessary for us to first understand what the emergency, how we would look at the emergency. And will the person experiencing the emergency be able to come directly and apply, or will they have to go through another organization as a referral? And
So
how do we
Deidre,
prioritize it?
that is a fantastic question. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think HOF does not go directly to individuals. It is something that is managed through an entity that would apply. So I do not think that we would be talking about, setting up anything where my house burned down and I'm able to come directly. I think that that always goes through an entity that would manage those funds. And I see the URA shaking their heads.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's absolutely correct. Especially because of the limited nature of this fund, having individuals apply on their own behalf is probably not the most efficient way to use these resources and would be tough to like pilot a program per se.
So Deidre, thank you for that, because I think that's an important distinction. And I also think, to your point, what is an emergent? What would we be looking at in both? What is innovation? What would be pilot or new programming? And what is emergent? What would be an emergency? We do definitely need to get language on both of those. Some people's ideas of innovation are not particularly innovative.
Yeah.
And those are tough to describe too, because especially if you want it really innovative, it's almost to the applicant to make the case that it falls under the criteria. But I think, we need some level of criteria, hence this whole conversation. That's a challenging one.
Okay, so I'm the time watcher. I'm gonna just move us into another little piece of this, which is this ranking system. I think there are certain things that are easily quantified and things that are not. Eric has been doing a lot of good thinking around this.
Yeah, I definitely have. It's sort of a complicated question because, of course, some things are, easy to give a number to. Is it permanent or is it temporary? In my current ranking system, give a point for permanent, don't give a point for temporary. But that also, I mean, even just that calls into question because you remember the homeless shelter that we funded a few years ago, that was temporary. So in my system currently, it would get slightly less points because, we obviously want permanent things. But I don't think anybody would argue that that was a poor investment either. So I do have a system for this. Like we do have a point system that I do think is fairly, I think it's fairly good. And I think the numbers it gives is helpful. But I do think a really important part of this process has to be an individual review of each application. And we can further refine the number if that's really, really important. We can put a lot of time into that. But I really think understanding what it is that is being asked, especially on the emergent side, maybe innovative is a little bit more, I think the points can do a little bit more there. But for emergent, we need to decide what that definition of emergent is. And then, face to face talking to the organization or the individual, well, I guess organization really applying, be able to find out what exactly they're asking for and how closely that matches our definition. I think that's the important part. But we have the system for the numbers and we can certainly provide those, but it's definitely going to have to be a sort of case by case basis, I think, especially because these applications are going to be for a far range of things, especially for, emergent can be anything. As we were saying, that's a hard definition to pin down. And innovation, well, we can't predict the innovation that people are going to come up with. So, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. And as I'm going to send out that the job form again to all of you to review. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on how that point system should be, how we should go about that, and how you want to receive that information.
I appreciate what you just said, Eric, but I think this is when you lean on your advisory board. We're here because we are subject matter experts, and this is what we do on a day-to-day, right? And so, like in an example, like we will have to narrow it down. We'll have to we have to explicitly say this, and everything can't be open-ended. But because we do this work, we could those of us on this advisory board, we can get together for 30 minutes and and send over to you some examples of innovation, scalability. It could be tiny homes, like right, that type of thing, emergencies, what that looks like. That's something that's our wheelhouse because we live it. We do this work. This is why we are on the board. So I would implore you to lean on us to provide that support. We can come together. Advisory board members, I know I'm putting us out here, but we can literally come together, a 30-minute call, and we can send to you a whole host of examples of what it looks like to have an innovative pilot and also urgent, and what it means for urgent and emergency. And then you all can then go through it, massage it, and see if this makes sense, how this works with your current structure, because we don't know exactly, what you need to do and the checks and balances you all have. And so you can do that. So if that makes sense, I think that's a much better way. And, there's so many examples of what we can do with this. And like I said, we do this work. That's an easy one.
Absolutely. I appreciate that.
I think I just heard Tanika suggest that she's going to convene an ad hoc conversation on defining innovation and emergent need.
Yep, you did. I actually put it as an action item. So, yes.
Well, you can count me in.
Oh, Deidre, I already know.
So folks that would like to be part of that conversation, can you just say your first name out loud so Tanika will know who to reach out to?
Oh, that's an option? No, I'm just playing. I have everyone's email. Everyone's getting
We can invite everyone. There's a very small group of us. We can certainly invite all of us.
This is James. You can include me for sure.
You can certainly include me.
Yep. I'm just writing everybody's name down. Lena,
Everybody's here. You just got volunteered.
Alan, voluntold.
Join us, then
Yeah.
we understand, but
Karen, Jerome, Deidre. Got it.
I'm going to start using voluntold. But I did hear one of the core pieces that I heard out of this last several minutes of conversation is that there is value in putting a number, quantifying elements of the application that lend to that. But there also will need to be this second piece, which is much more qualitative and will be much more massaged. And the advisory will have to be much more engaged in those nuances of applications that can't be as easily scored.
Yeah.
And I see everybody shaking their head that we're committing to that we will be more deeply engaged in the review of these applications, recognizing there won't be 70 of them this year. There will be a smaller number of applications that we will be looking at. Well, I guess I can't say there won't be 70. I don't know. But something I want to put with that is we have relied on the URA staff in the past to do sort of a first round of review on any applications we receive. I've found the URA staff to be completely above board in those reviews and bringing forward only applications to us that really have some level of viability. I'm assuming that members of the advisory are still comfortable with that vetting. And I am seeing head shaking yes. Is there anyone that feels we have to see every application regardless? Okay, I see a lot of no's, so I'm going to take that as we still want to use our URA expertise as the first vetting of any applications that we do in any type of funding rollouts that we're engaged in. All right, I'm moving down this list to prioritization. I actually really resonated with Tanika's suggestion to have a theme. We do have limited dollars, but I think for especially emergent need, trying to sort of set some bumpers on what all might be emergent need could be really important. Emergent need could come from any place. And I'll give an example to illustrate. Wood Street Commons. Wood Street Commons has 259 residents. One of the most important programs at that building is the meals, because we have folks who there's nowhere else for them to get meals. Wood Street Commons is about to potentially close their commercial kitchen permanently. Now, I care about that a ton. And I'm currently working toward raising funds so that that doesn't happen. Anybody who wants to talk to me after this meeting about that, you're more than welcome to. However, that actually is an affordable housing need. People live at Wood Street who need that level of support. That could be completely destabilizing for the residents that live at Wood Street Commons. Is this advisory entertaining requests for food? You know, we do need to have some bumpers to give to our community partners to, you know, make this manageable. I would love to see the HOF give funds to that program. It's near and dear to my heart. I spent more time there than I spent in my own home. However, I don't know that the HOF should be entertaining that type of request. So I do think this prioritization conversation is an important one. It may be easier to do that piece of the dialogue once we have our definition of innovation and emergent. We could then take that definition and build around it for clarity and for concentration of where we do want to put these dollars. What are folks thinking on that? Or maybe you're not thinking anything, but would like to think about it more.
I think it's like I'm struggling with like trying to predefine emergent, right? Like I think for the innovative side, like I love the idea of a theme, like just to give us some prioritization, but the emergent side is going to be a thing we're not thinking about right now, mostly.
Yeah.
And so like if we're splitting this into sort of two tracks, like let's accept that maybe we have to treat the two tracks a little bit differently.
Yep, I agree. I agree, Alan.
And prioritization might be big. It may be that it really has to be housing in a box that has four corners in it. It can't be food. It can't be transportation. It can't be medical care. Even though all of those do touch, and I could make the argument for all of those to be housing.
Yeah.
I think that's more of the piece that for me in the emergent conversation, it's, are there four corners? Because flexible funding for an emergent need could really be anything.
Yeah. So immediately I think like vulnerability and like an immediate threat, essential services, like those are the things that come to my mind when I think about, when I hear urgent and emergency. So even and that's still huge, it's still broad, but I do like the out of the box thinking because we're going to have to. Funding is going to look differently. And so if we don't step in, it could potentially, other things can be derailed. So I think that we definitely need to be thinking outside of the box, but I can justify almost anything. So so be careful. Yeah. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so I do think that that's important, especially for the URA, because this is legislatively driven.
Right. And clarity is always key. Something that the URA has done in the past, not through HOF, but just through other sources of funding, is we have had an emergency home repair program that has been funded from time to time that will help homeowners with emergent needs. That could be, we could, I mean, like if we brought something like that to this committee, maybe a small pot could be set aside, and that's something where we could assist individuals if that's something that the committee wanted to do. But I do agree that emergent, we do need to put some guide rails around what emergent means to us. And, we're happy to sit in on meetings to help just understand how, processing wise, administratively, how these, your thoughts around these things could, how we'll work through those.
And could we also have our legal, even if not at the smaller group, at our next larger conversation, could we also have our legal advisors, one or many of them, with us for the next conversation?
I think
so
so.
that there's anything that we're not thinking of, we don't overstep or overstretch.
Sure. Yep. We can do that.
Well, how about this? It has to be outside the box, but there needs to be one side. It needs to have a shelter. Because we're doing housing, so we need shelter. There's your
It can be outside the box, but it has to fit into a
box of housing shelter. And housing is a human right.
So I'm not sure about everyone else. You know that I am quite the timekeeper. For me, I have so many things swirling around in my head at this moment. I love thinking about the first box as this conversation of innovation and emergent projects. I don't think that we would get to a consensus on that today. But I do think we would get to a consensus on it before the next meeting, at least to have our straw man. So if folks feel comfortable with that next smaller group conversation on those definitions, I think that would be helpful for us to frame our conversation for a deeper, dive into this. I think the way that we structure that also ties to rollout. And so I would sort of like to, most of the things that Eric has on this slide, I think will be informed by that next conversation and then can be brought to our February meeting for a deeper dive. Do folks feel comfortable with maybe, leaving where we are today, knowing that we have some follow-up steps as the advisory that we're really going to be focused on before February's meeting?
I am.
Okay, I see thumbs up. I see head shaking. So we have some follow-ups where Eric's going to send us the application back again for us to just take a new look at it with fresh eyes, think about the two prongs of innovation and piloting, urgent and emergent needs. We're going to have this small group conversation on those definitions. And in that conversation, we're going to be setting our minds up for how we're scoring, prioritizing, and rolling out our next steps. Wonderful. Well, I feel really good about this conversation. And I actually ran into a previous advisory team member earlier today who was so excited that we're really diving into this demo dollar conversation and getting this structure put on it. It's really powerful. And so thank you, everyone. I don't think we would have been here if we, hadn't gelled so well as a group and made the commitment to really pushing things forward. So I feel pretty great about it. All right, so we are going to then step into the state of the HOF. Thank you, Kiana, for clarifying which demo dollar years that we have. And we will remember that $650,000 total for our next conversation.
All right. Yeah, thank you all for that great conversation about the demonstration dollars. I feel like that was a big step forward. Anyways, the state of the HOF and programmatic expenditures. This is from the last month of 2024 up until just yesterday when I ran this report. As you can see, kind of a slower time for us, not that surprising. Many people in our department were off. Most came out of the legal assistance as far as expenditure, homeowner assistance as well, and exactly one down payment and closing costs assistance program. So And then this is the total from all of 2024. This is all of Hoff's activities over the year. So as we can see, Rental Gap, our biggest program as far as expenditure at over 3 million, followed by the Housing Stabilization Program at just over or almost 2.2 million. Then the homeowner assistance and legal assistance programs, both at over 1.4 million. For sale development was somewhat of a slower year for it at only 384,000. Down payment and closing costs did 586,000, which for a program that only expends at most 7,500 per client is a pretty large number. That's quite a number of people that we helped get new homes. And then, of course, the small landlord fund had actually kind of a banner year at say, almost 60,000. But hopefully that will be much more this next year with the recent revisions to that program.
So Eric, something that's interesting about the 2024 expenditures, if you really look at who utilized the programs, it appears to me, and if I'm remembering correctly from the legal assistance conversations, that the vast majority of funds have actually gone toward renters.
Yeah.
Rental housing situations. So I think that's important for us to recognize and think through. It really has been much more rental focused. That isn't necessarily how it has been every year. So just for us as, we're entering into 2025 to think about that, I think is important.
Yeah, I think just to chime in here, some of the service programs that we have are mostly for renters, like legal assistance, where it's for homeowners as well, but we see mostly renters using that program. Rental Gap has always kind of taken up a larger chunk of the funds. And I think a lot of our programs just are more geared towards renters, but the for sale development program looks a little low this year, but I do want to say that this could partially be because some of the ARPA funds that the URA received went towards for sale development. And so we prioritized getting those funds under contract, spending those down before the Hoff funds. So this doesn't mean that there's not for sale activity happening. Actually, there's a lot of homes being constructed. I'm really excited about the for sale activity that's going on across the city. But this is just Hoff. There's other URA really, funds that have been going into some of these activities as well. And I also want to note that these 2024 expenditures could be funds from prior years as well. So this is not just from the 2024 allocation. There could be 2023 funds that are included and just were spent down in the year of 2024 here.
So in 2025, we could potentially see
2024 funds being spent.
Yeah. Sometimes even earlier, there's little traces of funding that members of our team managed to dig up. So we're always trying to spend down the oldest that we have. But yeah, these are not all from the 2024 year allocation specifically.
And thankfully, Eric has been working a lot to, make sure that the finances look a little more clear and delineated, because I know it can be confusing. I also think this year that we want to do a lot better job with our outreach to, folks participating in this process and in these meetings. I think that we have many years had more homeowners participating in the survey. So it's interesting. I think we need to keep our eyes on perception of how the funds are used and how the funds are used and how it ties to other programs. I think that has been somewhat unclear in our ongoing conversations as to how does this fit into the landscape of funding, especially the landscape of funding for the URA. So I'm hoping as we, see slides like this, we're feeling comfortable to ask those questions of what does this really mean?
Speaking of which, it really means this. This is that new chart that I've been updating and maintaining for you all. So just shows you, our expenditures, commitments, and balance along with the total allocation. Not much change this month compared to last month because there wasn't that much expenditure in December. But just good to keep in mind where all these levels are at. And how much funding we have to work with. All right, if there's no questions, take us to adjournment.
Okay, so next month we are going to be talking about demo dollars. We're going to be using all our great mental energy for demo dollars. Thanks to Karen for reminding us about committees. In this first quarter, next month, or in March, we definitely want to be talking about, are there work groups that need to be convening outside of our larger structural meetings that are happening once a month? So keep your, best thinking as we have these conversations. What would be a great work group? What do we not have enough time to dive into in these meetings? What would be incredibly important information or best practices for us to be bringing to the table? We'll also have new members joining, hopefully this first quarter, which we're very excited about. I don't see anyone joining us for public comment today at the end of the meeting or at the beginning of the meeting. We want to have that in our mindset for February. I personally would love to roll out a policy for us as the advisory team for every meeting to bring a friend. Someone that we think that we haven't heard their voice, someone who brings something to this thought leadership, someone who would be engaged if we gave them the opportunity to be engaged. So I would highly encourage everyone for every meeting, whether you're joining virtually or you're coming in person, to please try to think about who should be at these meetings that isn't. We will continue to have the established public comment in the beginning of the meetings, and I am committed to us having an open public comment at the end of the meeting about things that we've discussed or not discussed. So let's be thinking and trying to pull that forward. I know it's snowy. We may have more virtual joiners than in-person joiners at this time, but we do want more folks here for the conversation. You're all incredibly intelligent, representing lots of facets of housing across our community. But that doesn't mean we have every voice that will really impact us doing the best work that we can. So please think about that as we go forward. Any members have any announcements, items that they would like on the upcoming agenda that we haven't discussed? Well, I would like to say personally how much I appreciate all of you and this opportunity to engage in these really important conversations. Thank you to our URA staff. We will see you in February. This is not the last moment to speak. If you have things that you feel that we need to be discussing, please feel free to reach out and we'll make sure we get them on the agenda. Do we have a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Ellie. And we do not need a second on motions to adjourn. So meeting adjourned.